Hello and welcome to Cinema Spectator, a show where an expert and casual movie fans talk about their own podcast for an hour. Just kidding. That's not really what the show is about, but it is today because we're taking a little bit of a look back at our show. And one of the reasons is because we have been doing this. This is our 52nd episode.
Woo!
So congrats to us. We have been doing it for a whole year now. And I wanted to take this time to kind of look back at I would say our experiment or our little dry run, our little test, and see kind of the things that we've taken out of it, both as, me as the quote unquote expert and you as the casual. And, I want to go back through our list of movies and talk about some of the highlights. I think this month, instead of doing all movies, we're actually going to take a little bit of time to kind of digest where we've been through so far. Take a couple weeks, maybe recalibrate a little bit, or talk about sort of how we're going to go on in the future. I mean, we'll get back to the movies in a couple weeks, but I want to take some time to sort of plant our flag here and do this as a little check mark, a little in video games when you get to a point where you what is that called when you have like a save point or whatever?
Yeah.
We're getting to this year into our podcast, and we should take a little note of it. So also just a quick little sidetrack before we get into it, but we did record an extra episode for the patrons. So it is on the movie The Wild Bunch. We talk a little bit about sort of Westerns in general, but yeah, it's a fun movie. I think we had a good discussion, and if you want to listen to that, please sign up for our Patreon.
Yeah, all the info is at patreon.com/ECFS Productions. Get a bunch of benefits. We used to, we might still offer commentary tracks each month as a bonus episode, but we figured instead of doing a commentary track, we would actually just do a full fleshed out episode. So if you want to hear our thoughts on The Wild Bunch, Cameron has some good context, and it's a weird movie. It's weird. So we're excited for you patrons to have access. Again, just the dollar level, and you can also have other benefits and stuff at other price ranges. So yeah, all the support helps the show. Just listening and sharing, all of it's good. We won't show very much more, but if you want more of our content, that's where you can find it.
Yeah, so I've asked Isaac to kind of take a look at our episode list so far and think about the ones that he really enjoyed just straight off the bat. And I think next week we'll probably go into ones that maybe needed to take a little time to sink in. And yeah, I want to talk about kind of how movies change in your mind when you have more of a context of something. But for now, I want to talk about like your faves. So yeah, I mean, why don't you run us through? You have a list, right?
Yeah, so we're going to narrow it down to the top 5, and that's what this episode is called, right? The show, as Cameron pitches at the beginning of each episode, is with someone that has a lot of context on movies, showing someone that doesn't. That's me. I don't have a lot of context. And honestly, as friends, Cameron and I were really excited to partake in maybe a podcast that is a little bit of an experiment, right? I am a bit of a lab rat in this scenario, but it's been so neat to have this massively diverse set of 51 movies. This is our 52nd week, right? And to look back on them and say, wow, like that's the one that I really remembered. I mean, just going through the list before we started recording, I was looking at a movie called The Big Sleep, which is not a bad movie by any means, but I'm looking at it, I'm like, there's just something about it that didn't stick with me. And I don't even remember disliking the movie. I don't think it was bad at all. I like Humphrey Bogart and, some of the other things I've seen him in. But yeah, like just that visual, like seeing the title and not having any sort of like spark versus the list of 10 that I have here that we're going to narrow down to 5. Like these 10, I'm like, oh, like what a movie that I wish I saw sooner. What a movie that brought about like so much excitement. So I'm sure we're going to talk about the ones that almost gave me a more negative reaction versus the lukewarm ones that I barely remembered. And then this episode is all focused on the ones that obviously get me amped up and excited. As far as maybe exploring the negative ones in the future weeks, right? That conversation, as Cameron was saying, is gonna turn more into like an analysis of the experiment as a show overall, right? So it's not just gonna be like, this movie sucks. Like it's gonna be more of like, why does someone who doesn't have as much movie context respond? So I'm actually really looking forward to those conversations as well. But I guess we can start it off. Cameron, I don't know if I should do it by like how like the order of our podcast existence. I guess we'll go all the way back to some of the earliest films you were showing me. And now that, of course, that I've been chewing on a lot of different movies, to see me still be positive on some of these ones with my viewing being like a limited, scope. It's cool that I still feel positive about some of them. The first one is The Great Dictator, which I think is genuinely one of the best movies ever made and one of the most important movies that nobody has heard about. At least in my sphere, where you're a casual movie watcher that goes and sees Marvel films. The Great Dictator has it all for being such an old movie. And it's shocking. It is shocking how impactful the movie is, how important it is in its context. It's so timeless for being so old. I think that's what really shook me to my core, that a movie could be fun and have that like Looney Tunes slapstick style, and then really deliver such a heartfelt statement like around humanity and of course the historical context and trauma of World War II and the scars that it put on the world, and even that Charlie Chaplin can make such profound statements in the context of actually being in the middle of World War II as well, right?
Yeah, or even just at the very beginning, seeing things sort of preemptively. Yeah, no, it's true. Well, and then also like the risk to his own person too. He was someone who was very famous worldwide, and he's openly, criticizing someone who has a lot of power. And at the same time, I guess maybe back then it wouldn't have been considered something bad, but he's also like, he plays Hitler in half of the movie. And like, there's a certain amount of risk to that as well. So I think there's a level of it being so funny, so enjoyable, and also just so, real and relevant and like you said, heartfelt. Yeah, I totally agree. I think The Great Dictator is up there for me as well. So
yeah, so I could go on and on about this film, from the funny moments that have stuck with me. Like obviously the scene with Hitler bouncing the world off his bum is just unforgettable, right? And then that final shot where Charlie Chaplin, being a silent actor, delivers just a speech that goes beyond movies and cinema itself, right? Yeah. This movie needs, I cannot stress it, like you need to see it. And it's so sad to me that the black and white stigma that I had going into watching movies, like that was really challenged by this movie.
And it was only like our 4th episode or something, right? It was
right. At that time, I was still like, I don't believe in black and white movies.
Yeah,
even seeing this one,
true.
Right? But that was the foundation of sort of, shaking that perception of what a great movie could be.
Yeah, well, and one of the interesting things too, I guess, to talk about is like that stigma, I guess, for you, has that like gone away completely now, or do you still kind of have that initial hurdle, I guess? When
my main reservation with black and white films is how individuals will tamper their expectations because it's black and white, and I still do. It's almost like if you want to enjoy it, you have to forgive it right away. But I think that there are movies like The Great Dictator, or honestly, like some other films we're going to talk about here, movies like Casablanca and The Apartment, which they don't need you to hold their hand. They can stand by themselves. They're powerful enough. There's very few things that you have to excuse in some ways. And I do think that The Great Dictator maybe has like a slapstick style that can pin it to being like a black and white movie, if that makes sense. But it is still excellent. Like I don't know how else to put it. I do believe that watching black and white movies, I have to give them a little bit of grace with some of the, narration over like wide shots and strange, like there's strange decisions made to kind of like that were of that time that kind of timestamp them, besides just it being black and white.
Mhm.
And some of the movies that I have on this list don't have those tropes, or they have them in a minimal way. I mean, I think Casablanca has narration to some degree, I think, at the beginning, right? When they're explaining what the bar is all about.
Just a little bit. But I mean, like narration itself isn't necessarily bad. Like I think there's ways that it can be bad, but even, something I don't know. I guess, yeah, even something like Goodfellas is, it's got narration obviously, but is used in an interesting way. I understand where you're coming from, but yeah, no, I get what you mean in that there's like certain affects that older movies have that are maybe a little bit more challenging to get into. Yeah,
I would say that any of those like tropes or techniques that were used in old filmmaking that are in these movies is used so tastefully and effectively that they are not something that you have to really excuse. They're used quite like, yeah, honestly tastefully. So
yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of like how I wanted to open with The Great Dictator, but we got to get through these 10 because I also want to have a conversation about shaving them down. It's crazy that it kind of worked out to 10. Actually, I think it's 12 because I combined some movies together. So there's some stuff to work through here. I have Casablanca on here. This is a movie I've only seen once that I need to see again. And I've decided that I'm going to try to watch it again.
Mm-hmm.
It is like start to finish. It feels like a movie that I can understand why people regard it as one of the greatest movies made. And also like it has like this quality about it that's like cup of noodle soup-esque. I don't know like exactly, like I haven't fully dissected this movie because I've only watched it once. And I just remember it being a very pleasant journey with little touches of comedy, heartfelt moments. Again, has some scars from World War II that are still very emotional to this day, right? The scene with the German army singing in the bar and then the French immigrants singing over them is awesome. And then the context that you shared on that episode has really stuck with me. But the plot and the drama revolving around the plot has you engaged throughout the film. The acting performances are endearing, and it's just a setting that is dreamlike in some way. The bar that Humphrey Bogart is running like has this almost like this feeling that you've been there and you're like a part of that place because it wraps you around that setting with all these characters that bring it to life. And it's almost like sometimes, this is weird, but it's almost like I've had dreams in that place even though I've never been in it. Like there's something alive about this movie that I haven't quite pinned down. And overall, like it's got a really fun, happy ending as well. I'm not saying that a happy ending makes a movie good, but there's just such a positive spirit around this film. When
Yeah.
I saw it on the list, I was like, it's great. It's fantastic. I understand why people reference it all the time. Even though when I initially watched it, I was like, this is good. It's one of those movies that I'm like, no, like I need to revisit it. I'm excited to revisit
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Well, that's funny because that's one that I didn't quite care for. I mean, I enjoyed the first time, but it wasn't like, on the top of my list or anything.
Yeah.
That revisiting and thinking about over and over again has just like consistently become a movie that I've fallen in love with. And I think you're right. There's something aesthetically that is easy to fall in love with, I guess. There's a
Yeah.
charm to it.
Yeah.
All right, what's the next one?
I put The Thing down.
Me too.
And this is because this movie is just awesome. It's
It's so good.
I don't even know if it's like a excellent movie, but I just had so much enjoyment watching it. And I watched it with my dad, so that was kind of fun as well.
Mm.
The special effects are just wild. The setup for an alien that's a shapeshifter is memorable. Again, the setting of the snow base is also one of those places that sticks with you. Kind of similar to Casablanca, where it's like I feel like I could be trapped there in a dream. And there's just this 80s action feel that is so potent. And I think a lot of people haven't watched this movie.
Yeah.
So, like in our age range, and I think you should. I think it's
And I think they'd love it. Like this is a movie that, like we mentioned on the episode, was basically like 20 years ahead of its time.
Yeah,
like
totally.
it's a movie that was reviled at the time, but it has come back to sort of be really loved and enjoyed. No, I totally agree. This movie's awesome. It's so fun. So the setup and the tension and the game. Every time you go back and watch it, there's something new you think of. There's something new you kind of piece together. And it's just effortless. Like this movie is so enjoyable. It's not really effortless because it took a lot of work, obviously, to do all this, but it feels effortless.
And I really
So.
liked how we did a double feature with Thing from Another Planet or Another World or whatever it's
A
called.
Howard Hawks movie.
I know, yeah. That movie's actually stuck with me a lot as well, but in it's not like any sort of profound way. I was like, that's like a monster movie that I think about. Like I took this sci-fi and horror class in college, and I was like when we watched that movie, I was confused why that wasn't included in that class. Because to me, I'm like, this is a perfect example that should go up next to like the old King Kong movie, and it's better than a lot of the other movies I've watched that were like black and white in that era as well. So obviously that one's not going to make the list because I think The Thing is a more of a timeless, enjoyable film. But we gotta give it props. At number 4, because we're moving through horror at this point in the show, I have The Shining. This movie shocked me, and I want to thank actually Tim Smith because we watched it in this like ultra 4K like enhanced whatever like remastered thing, and the movie is amazing looking if you can watch it in that format.
Yeah.
I was actually blown away about how old the movie was and how just alive the movie looked with that remastered thing. I tried watching it on streaming afterwards with my girlfriend to be like, oh, like you've never seen it, you got to see it. And the non-remastered, like, kind of, it didn't ruin it for me, but I was like, you just got to see it in the right way now. Like it turned me into somebody that wanted to watch movies the right way, which I hate,
Why?
Yeah, again,
I'm that person.
this movie has something about it that like the setting is a place that will kind of stick with you in your dreams in a way,
Yeah.
Jack Nicholson in it is super off the wall, he's acting in his prime in some regard. The scene with him like at the bar in the ballroom is just one of the most memorable settings like that I've seen in a movie. Like it just your eyes are like just it's eye candy, and then he goes into the
Mm.
bathroom with the red, and you're just like, this is like it just looks amazing. There's such a feeling. Sometimes, like for me, I can analyze a movie and I don't even like, to be honest with you, The Shining doesn't really make any sense to me. It's super quirky. It's super weird.
Yeah.
And a little bit like pretentious in a lot of ways, but there's a feeling with it where it's like they're hitting this creative strive. And there's like this also like unnatural, like it's not like a lot of horror movies I've seen. It doesn't, it's very, it's
I think
very
honestly,
odd.
you've just described every Kubrick movie, so I'm pretty happy with that description.
Yeah,
It
I
doesn't
don't,
make a lot of sense. It's very quirky and weird, but it has a feeling to it that you just can't explain and hooks you. Yeah,
I'm
no, I
not,
think that's true.
I'm not a fan of Kubrick because from like just some of the context around him and him being crazy, like that bothers me a lot.
Sure, yeah.
I feel like there's a little bit of a moral block for me to be like, I recommend this film, but there is something about it that like there's obviously a ton of heart put into the film, but also there's also like stories about the lead actress being really driven crazy with this role and stuff. So that's why I'm a little hesitant on this movie. I just don't like some of the moral side of things, and I don't know, like that puts a bad taste in my mouth. But otherwise, like there's just so much to remember, like to remember a feeling with this movie, and that's really special to me when a movie has like a feeling that is unique and unforgettable, and it's hitting a stride. So yeah, I gotta give it credit. We moved into our first director month afterwards with Scorsese, and I have Goodfellas down and The Irishman. I think I already know, like, my heart is with The Irishman more because this movie, although not for everyone, I've heard a lot of critiques that this movie is boring. It is one of the movies that has really moved me personally, and not a lot of movies can do that. It is like such a interesting retrospective, and I think the way you presented Scorsese as well, Cameron, has a lot to do with the way I responded to the film.
Mm-hmm.
But like, just it's so like, I don't know how to, it's hard to describe, but the ending, like you think it's gonna be like this mob movie, and there's all this, you're expecting a crazy action, crazy mob thing going on, criminals and all that, but the ending is so like contemplative about the meaning of life, and I did not expect that, and it's a question that I personally strive to chew on a lot. I think for some people, maybe that question is too difficult for them to relate with, that it's almost like an arm's length away, maybe that's the blocker for this being for everyone, that some people aren't ready to face that kind of questioning. But it's subconscious, like everyone is kind of struggling through something like that, and I think the way it's presented is extremely mature and very it poses a lot of questions because it wants you to explore that in your personal life. And I'm like, that's a little bit of a it's like a very human, relatable topic, but it's also like, it takes a lot of guts for a director to be like, I want you to consider the point of your life, and I'm gonna I'm going to put that at the end of my film, even though you wanted this quirky action mob movie. I'm gonna almost depress you in a way, but really also try to uplift you to try to like consider that. It's very very direct. And I
And he does it to his own work, you know.
yeah,
He does it to his own career. He, you know, obviously with the context of it being a mob movie, you know, it's something that he's being reflective about. So no, I think you're right in the fact that it is mature, and that's why I think you and I and a lot of people responded to it, because I think a lot of times when you hear like, oh, the meaning of life, like it's treated almost like a cliche, or like something
yeah,
that's not really you know, thought deeply about. But this movie is like, is way the opposite. It's like, you know, it's really, it's posing a deep moral question. And I don't think many movies, I don't think a lot of media at all really delves deep into that, because it's a scary question. So yeah, no, I agree.
yeah. I wanted to talk more about Goodfellas, but I don't think it can compare. And it's a very enjoyable movie. I mean, we talk about it a lot. I really enjoyed it. It just, when you put that kind of like, I don't know, it's like having like, oh, do you want like a cheeseburger that's really good and fun, you'd eat it more often, or like, do you want the best steak in the world, you know? Like
Yeah,
it's just
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like, I don't know. Maybe you don't want the best steak in the world every night. You would rather have that cheeseburger more often, but sometimes it's good to have like a really nice meal, you know? And that's how I feel about The Irishman, if that kind of makes sense. So
I totally agree. Yeah, yeah, no, totally.
up next is a Patreon voted movie for me. It's Jennifer's Body. I have watched this movie twice. I've revisited it. I don't think this one's gonna make the top 5, but I had to shout it out. What a fun, weird movie. Very much like Scott Pilgrim versus the World. And it's out there. It's crazy, and I kind of appreciate it for that.
Yeah, it's interesting for me in the context of, you know, it's kind of, it was kind of a joke, throwaway movie that I put on the list, and it ended up being like one that you really enjoyed, and one that I revisited too very positively, or much more positively than I initially um sort of gave it credit for. So yeah, no, it's a really it's really strange how that worked out.
Yeah, and the movie seems to be referenced in pop culture more now than ever. So it's kind of, it definitely has that cult classic feeling with it. It's it is a little bit of a immature movie, but I think that's its design. Like there's something
Yeah.
almost like it's trying to be like an edgy preteen, but it was designed in that like it was designed specifically to do that. And then there's also a lot of like anti um like pop star or Hollywood culture in there as well. Like
Yeah.
it's like the small town suffers from the famous people, and I think that's like such like cynical commentary put in a movie that's just it's very very strange. I don't know if everyone is gonna like this film, but it is like if you go in knowing that it's trying to be edgy, I think you'll enjoy it. So then we visited Wilder's movies, which is a director nobody's heard of, um, except for the film people. And I was really surprised by Witness for the Prosecution, and then to see Wilder's kind of golden egg in The Apartment. It was fun to learn about him as a director. I think Witness for the Prosecution is vastly underrated. It's a that movie I've never heard anyone talk about at all.
Mm.
And I think most people need to see it. But I can understand why The Apartment won a bunch of Academy Awards. And again, it is a movie, it's a difficult movie to get through. In terms of like I would say emotion. It is a little bit of a depressing story, but it has a very like there's a very important message in terms of like it's like the director is talking about complacency in life and you know taking action for moral things that are important. And I think like just those kind of statements in movies like I wish there was more of that, you know? Like that's really how I feel about it. Is I wish there was a way that movie creators could place these big questions for the audience to chew on therefore after, you know. Uh it's it's a special movie to me. I think there's a hipster side in me that wants to recommend Witness for the Prosecution more, but The Apartment definitely has more of that staying power
Yeah.
in your mind. But man, people got to watch Witness for the Prosecution. That's it's such a fun movie.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, and I think you brought it up just generally, is that I think people should take Billy Wilder more seriously. They should sort of. I think he's one of the forgotten um, great filmmakers. He's my favorite director of all time. He's like, it's something that is depressing to me that people don't um know his work more.
Yeah.
Maybe they've heard of The Apartment, but I doubt, if you pulled 100 people on the street, how many how many do you think would have seen The Apartment? I don't
I
know, maybe one. I'm not sure, but
I also want to say that the whoever designed the poster for The Apartment is the worst. Like it's essentially a poster that's supposed to look like Some Like It Hot, you know? And I don't know
yeah,
if you've
sort of.
seen it. Like it's like the girl's like shrugging her shoulders, and then there's Don Lemon next to her, and the other guy that's like the corporate. Um,
Well, there's a couple different posters, obviously, but yeah. I mean,
for
yeah, that's kind of just indicative of the time period, though. Like that's how all of the movies were marketed back in the day, I would say. So
but this movie, I think, really deserves, you know, a cover that is like the lonely park bench, or you know, the
mm,
long empty offices with a guy sitting. Like I just this movie has so much more than a girl shrugging her shoulders down. Oh no, like it's a love triangle, because that's not really the movie's, like it's part of the plot, but it's not not
yeah,
at all what you think of when you think of a love triangle. You know, it's extremely um, mature and depressing, and pretty dramatic as well. So yeah, The Apartment, it sticks with you. It sticks with you real good. So
yeah, I agree.
it's important. At number 8, I had Children of Men, which is a movie that I had seen the poster for many times and really known nothing about. I get this movie mixed up before ever seeing it with the Book of Eli for some reason, they're very two different movies.
Which I do like, the Book of Eli, actually.
Yeah.
But
um, Children of Men is honestly, I think one of the most flawless films I've ever seen made.
I kind of agree. Yeah.
It is surprisingly like just surprisingly crafted with a level of excellence that can easily be unnoticed, but it's also like I picked it up pretty quick, that I'm like, wow, they're shooting a lot of this handheld, and I don't know when this movie is ever cut, you know?
Yeah.
There's something about the cinematography that is very stylish and very effective. And the movie, again, starts to dive into, like, this is my least favorite trope with like apocalyptic end of the world movies, is they're basically like, what would you do if we were in apocalypse? Like, wouldn't you be so sad? Wouldn't this be so scary? You'd be thinking about your kids, you'd be thinking about your family, you know, you'd be thinking about how hard life would be in that time, you know? And for a movie about sort of like the world really breaking down and falling apart, there's more of a analysis of like humanity as an entity versus individuals struggling in that. And I think that is a much harder thing to explore than doing the personal, like, I have a child in the zombie apocalypse, so therefore, like, daddy and son issues in the midst of trauma, or there's two people in love in the midst of an apocalypse, and so love with trauma is much deeper. It really doesn't dive into the in all honesty, there is humanity on an individual level in this movie, but it is not the focus at all. The focus is, does humanity have the ability to find hope in such great despair? And that, there is this attitude, there's this theme of almost gratitude versus greed in the movie. I know that's kind of a strange way of putting it, but it's there are people out there in the world fighting to get things, right? Whether it's power, sections of property. Really, it's a drive for power, I think. And then there's also this counter movement that is shining a light into the world that's like gratitude from the smallest thing is fertility, right? I mean, it's not a small thing, but obviously it's I don't know. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying, Cameron?
Yeah, no, I get. Well, I think about every time I watch it, I think about the scene where he walks down the stairs,
Yeah.
with the crying baby, and it literally makes me bawl every single time. And I think there's such power in just the filmmaking and even, as you're saying, sort of the philosophical undertones, or the sort of the deeper thematic ideas that it's pointing out, I think are just so well done. The writing is really good. The story, I think, is really well done enough to sort of get the plot to where it needs to go, and keep you invested the whole time. And then, yeah, like you said, just the filmmaking is so flawless. No, I think it might be one of the greatest movies of the 20th century. It's definitely one of the greatest movies of the 20th century. And yeah, I think it deserves its spot in this list for sure.
Wouldn't it be the 21st century?
21st century. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah. No, it's no problem. I think this is a movie you should buy the highest quality version of it on Amazon and have it in your collection.
Yeah.
I don't even believe in really buying movies anymore because of streaming. But this is one where it's yes, it is worth it. It's a masterpiece. So yeah. It's rare to find a modern film that also has some of the, well, I mean, I guess The Irishman was 2019 as well. Yeah, it has something about it. You got to watch it. Number 9, I actually have Red River, Cameron, surprisingly. Red River.
I'm not surprised at all.
This movie, of course, there's some nostalgia thinking about my grandpa Knowlton, who loved John Wayne. But this, this is such a weird Western film. The ending is just out of nowhere. I love the structure of the plot and the drama between a young, hopeful cowboy and an old, calloused guy who's sort of losing it after trying so hard for so many years. And also the love that exists between these two men, even though there's tension and also some hatred in it. There's a care. So the character writing is just excellent, and the journey is very fun. I don't know if it punches with the same weight because of its lighthearted ending, but I really like this being the first Western we watched in the Western months. I was this is what I've always wanted in Western movies is the cowboy setting, but then this this epic journey and deep character growth. I think I might have compared it to Lord of the Rings-esque in its journey. It's an epic, they have so many cows on screen in this film, right? They're carrying tons of cows across this land, and then they have an end goal in mind, and there's like there's a fellowship, right? And they're trying to get there, and they run into all these challenges, and then the fellowship breaks. Like and it's all done in this one movie. It's really well done, and I can't believe it's Hawks because he just seems to do everything, which is crazy. It's just, it does begin to blow your mind the more you see what he's done.
Yeah, no, it's true. Which is another reason why I wanted to include him in our months. I feel like I've picked, looking back on it, I've picked some weird directors to like do a focus on. But
Yeah.
the reason why I picked all of the directors that I did, one was Scorsese is about sort of single-minded, like almost even just perfection or the cross of fun entertainment with something deeper and more interesting, and also the elevation of sort of what film can be. To me, I think Scorsese is definitely up there in terms of my directors. Wilder is just because I love him, and I think he's worth watching. And Hawks, I threw him in there because partly because he's an underdog, but he's also so prolific. Like, he's done so much. And I think he actually gives, following his career, he gives you a good example of how things sort of evolved in Hollywood, and how sort of the classical Hollywood period, like what were the standout features of the classical Hollywood period, better than almost anybody else, even people like Hitchcock, who is like virtuosic, but is someone who was kind of not pigeonholed, but he had his area of expertise, and Hawks, he had many areas of expertise. So I think, I don't know, that's why I chose him. Maybe I don't know, I kind of like going with the underdog directors, and I think I might we'll see what I do next month, because I have an idea that might be a little different and a little bit unique. And I think on this, speaking of like checkpoints in video games, I want to elevate to something maybe a little bit more difficult to get into initially, but has a lot of really great benefits in terms of your film journey. So we'll talk about that, I guess.
Oh boy.
Off air.
Oh boy. I don't know about this. We're talking about movies I like, Cameron, not about movies I'm going to dislike.
No, you will like all of these movies.
So yeah, Red River's on the list of the ones I wanted to narrow down. And then finally, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. Surprisingly, Cameron did not expect me to like this movie. This film is the cowboy movie that everybody should watch, even though it's not flawless. It's awesome. And I don't know, like it's so weird because it almost, this is what's frustrating to me. This movie is so well known, and it is so different than most cowboy movies. And that's what's so like, that's what draws you in about it, but it's also like it's such a strange package of things. Like, I could not stop thinking about how the film has this foreign feeling that, I mean, because it was made in Italy, right, as a spaghetti western, but it's super stylized. So for me, for some reason, I was thinking a lot about like anime when I was watching it. I don't even like anime, but the characters have like these larger than life designs, and they're like, every single scene in this movie has such memorable like tension and delivery, from the opening scenes of the guys trying to go like break into the saloon. You don't really know even what they're doing. And then the ugly being revealed, to Clint Eastwood, shooting ropes for people who are about to be hung. Like, and then the scene where Clint Eastwood's being like, dragged through the desert, the whole side plot of them visiting a like Civil War battle. Also the scene with the music and the ugly getting beat up by Angel Eyes, and then the finale of it is just like a master class, like mixing of cinema and music, because the score is just unforgettable. It's one of the first scores. It is the first score on this podcast that I have visited outside of watching.
Hmm.
Like it's like I listen to it on Spotify sometimes now when I drive, which there's been no movie that's done that for me on this, right? I mean, everybody knows 2001: A Space Odyssey, but it wasn't the score that I was like, I want to listen to this in my free time. Like The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. Yeah, like I was listening to it in my free time. It's fantastic. So again, it's a movie that just strikes the feeling. The feeling is right. And that goes a long way in my books for being recommended, I think. So
yeah. No, I think it's a great choice. And it's funny your comment about it reminds you of anime. This movie was not just this movie, but the first of the Dollars trilogy. I don't know if I mentioned this on the show, but it was based. Not just based, it was taken directly from Akira Kurosawa, from a samurai movie. So it's not surprising that you get that feeling, but it was A Fistful of Dollars is a Yojimbo remake. They were sued for it, actually. Like, so it's pretty amazing.
I knew, Cameron. Why didn't you say it on the show? I was like, I feel like I'm being like
we weren't talking about A Fistful of Dollars.
I know, but like my concern was, I was like, am I being like racist because it's a foreign film and the only thing I like foreign media that I've really seen?
I don't think we really
French?
talked about that though. I don't think we talked about how it had like the Japanese influence. But you're right. I mean, it did at the time. It's funny that you could see that through probably through 10 layers of glass.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you saw that from super far away, even though it was probably wasn't even all that all that. Yeah, you probably couldn't even really tell. You just had the feeling. No, I think that that's a testament to how inspired the movie was from sort of all angles, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I would sue it too if I was a Japanese creator. Like, wait, that's my stuff, I mean, obviously not The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. You said which one was sued?
A Fistful of Dollars.
All right, yeah.
The first one, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, those are the 12 that really stuck out for me out of the list of 51 films that we've watched. I've already been doing some shaving as we've kind of talked through them. I'm down to 7. I have The Great Dictator, Casablanca, The Shining, The Irishman, The Apartment, Children of Men, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. Lots of those. A lot of those in there.
Yeah, I would say that's a really, really great list. And honestly, if you were to give that list to anybody, that would be super solid, I think. Like literally, that would be a fantastic list of movies. But we're doing movies you need to see.
Cameron, we're doing the top 5.
Yeah.
So I'm going to rank them. And this is what's
do it.
difficult. As I'm looking at this list, I'm sorry, Kubrick fans, but The Shining is leaving. And it's hard. I tried to give it as much credit as I could, but I just couldn't. Now it's getting a little bit into subjective places.
Yeah,
man.
For sure.
So here's what I need to clarify. Do I rate these top 5 from a collective casual perspective? It's
no, they're your faves. They're your faves.
All right, we just need to clarify that. I'm not saying these are the for everyone picks out of the 51 films we've watched. This is me getting personal for sure. Okay, man, this is hard. The Great Dictator, Casablanca, The Irishman, The Apartment, Children of Men, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. So here's where I'm freezing up. Casablanca, I compared to chicken noodle soup. It's and then I would say The Irishman and The Apartment are definitely that heavy steak. Should I have 2 heavy steaks and get rid of the chicken noodle soup, or should I, kind of mix it up and be like, let's leave the chicken noodle soup and only pick one steak?
No, I would. I mean, it's up to you. It's your list, but I think my answer is that I would say both The Irishman and The Apartment deserve to be on the list for sure. But
I agree with you, because as I'm thinking about Casablanca, it's at the low of the 5. All right, so here's the list I have so far: The Great Dictator, The Irishman, The Apartment, Children of Men, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. I think The Good, the Bad, the Ugly stays at 5, if I'm being honest. It is a stylish thing, but it's not a flawless movie. I do think that it is surprisingly one of my new favorites from the podcast, but it is not flawless. Maybe I'm high off seeing it so recently, but it really did leave a good mark on me. Okay, let's see. Man, this is really tough. I wonder if this is the order as it is. I think I'm gonna change one thing. Sorry for the silence here. All right, this is my definitive list.
Okay.
At least for the first year of doing this podcast. At number 1, I have The Great Dictator, and it is a. I think it is a movie that is criminally forgotten. It should be required viewing in school, in my opinion. Like, it is so important. Like, it feels so important for its time, for today. There's so much to learn from this film, and it's somehow, with all of that heaviness, uplifting, joyful, and very fun. Like, it covers a spectrum of filmmaking that is so dynamic. Like, it has such a wide grasp on so many things in movies, and it's so old and it's done so well. I'm just like, almost, there's a part of me that's like, you can't even compete with it. There's a term that we use when you're either recording music, right, or filming with cameras, and it's called dynamic range, right? And it's like that idea of, like, I can't even really explain it, but it's how much information can be squeezed into the file in some regard, whether the like, for example, we just got a new soundboard at the church I work at, and the dynamic range difference of all the instruments, there's like so much headroom, there's so much air, there's so much clarity versus the old soundboard, which was muddy and brittle and sharp, if that kind of makes sense, right? So the reason I'm talking about this idea of dynamic range is that it captures with so much clarity so many different areas of, whatever you're recording. In music, it would be frequencies. The frequency clarity across the spectrum is wider and more, clear. And with cameras, it's the same. It would be like the image. I mean, you could probably speak to this more than me, Cameron, but the image quality is sharper. It represents the colors more accurately. It captures the most amount of detail and light.
Well, it's like the darkest parts to the lightest parts, essentially. Like, how much information in the darkest parts can you keep? How much information in the lightest parts can you keep?
So I'm going on this tangent because I believe that The Great Dictator captures the darkest darks and the lightest lights all in one film, Yeah. And it's not even that long. What is it, like 2 hours or less than 2 hours?
I think it's less, yeah.
Yeah, it's extremely important. So it's number 1 for me. And number 2 is The Irishman, because for me, it is posing a question that all of us need to face at one point or another, and it's unapologetic in that, and it's going to put it in your face. If you're not ready to face that, I can see why, I can see why that's difficult for you, but for me personally, it's like you shouldn't be running. Like, you need to start thinking about this as soon as possible. I mean, part of that maybe is subjective with my own faith um, and things like that. But I think the meaning of life is something that you might never ever have the answer 100% to, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't really sit down and begin to explore and ask questions and something like that. So I don't have all the answers at all, but I thought the way that this movie reminded me to explore that is profound. Number 3 is Children of Men, because I just think it's so well made, and extremely it's extremely good. I find that this movie, if you haven't seen it and you're a modern viewer, it will not disappoint you. Even on a surface level, it is. Even if you miss all the filmmaking techniques, if you miss most of the plot, like, you're gonna feel something watching this movie. You don't, being a casual, it's like, I don't watch movies to feel something. You know, I don't like that kind of movie watching. I think that just means you've watched too many movies if that's all you're looking for in a film. But this one hits on so many levels, emotionally, and just it's like, it feels like craftsmanship. That's really what this movie feels like, is craftsmanship. So I was really impressed by Children of Men. My respect for the film continues to grow after only seeing it once, which is surprising. Number 4 is The Apartment. Shout out to Wilder. I think that this movie's greatest flaws are it does feel a little long, but it has so much to say about an individual and the way they respond to situations. And it's really that it's an urgent call to take action in one's life, right? It's the themes and the things that it explores are much larger than the scope of the movie, and I think that's what really credits this film as a masterpiece. The ideas are beyond the scope of the film. I would say the same with The Irishman and The Great Dictator, and even to some regard Children of Men. But like, Wilder just has a way I think why this movie sticks with me so much is that it's not just this is like a existential thing that you're supposed to think about and really be moved by. Like, Wilder is like, no, I'm giving you a call to action to not be complacent in immoral situations. Like, I'm telling you to take action when morality is challenged, right?
And he's someone who's lived up to it too. He's someone who was outraged by things that were happening in his studio, and basically said, like, I'll never work for you again. Like, I'm out.
Yeah.
And so it's coming from a place of experience, and I think that shows. And I totally agree. He's such a I feel like he's such a pragmatist in his sort of evaluation in this movie. He's someone who's like it's not complicated. It's not, I'm not talking about like how one thing is better than the other. I'm saying this is what's right and this is what's wrong. Like, and there's and to me there's there's a clear choice here. Yeah, no, I think you're right. He's not talking about sort of like the heady philosophical, reasons for this. He's looking at it as it is, in real people's lives.
Yeah, I would say what's so powerful about the message of this film is that it is applicable directly to the individual in their life. The Great Dictator does have a strong moral call to action, but it is so broad in a collective sense of humanity needs to get it together. And we should love one another, right? And The Irishman is more pondering, like, we should probably think about what we're doing here. Children of Men is like, it's almost like a statement of, we believe that no matter how bad it gets, like, humanity can prevail in a way. The Apartment is like, you right now with your decisions and the things you're faced with, need to stand up for what is good and what is bad, or stand up for what is good, really. It's in your face, and it takes its time to win your trust in order to say that,
Yeah. Yeah.
It really, it is, it's not preachy, and it's so direct, right? That's I think as far as communication goes, very difficult to accomplish. Number 5 is The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. I think my number 5 spot will probably change eventually. This movie, I am just impressed a lot with it. It's special. You need to see it. We had a whole episode on it. It's very weird. It is so long, but it consistently catches the attention of someone who has ADHD, I think. Or I don't have ADHD, but I'm like, as a film viewer, I'm kind of bored sometimes. I'm like, all right, let's see what happens. And this movie is so long and drawn out, and I never once felt bored, which is just a evidence that the film is so well put together. It's an epic. It is legendary. I think people need to stop saying the title of this film and actually watch it. That's the best way I can put it. And
it's a movie that someone has a picture in their mind of, but they don't know. Like
yes,
they don't have any idea of what it is. And once you watch it, it's so different from that parody, or that that even just the opening title credits, you're like, wow, I've heard this before. Somehow this is familiar, but it's so unique and different. It's amazing.
Everything I expected this movie to be, it was not. and I still liked it,
Yeah.
I always thought the Mexican standoff that is famous in this movie would happen in a dusty western town in the middle of the town square, and it does not happen that way at all. It happens in a much different setting than you expect, and it is exactly where it needs to be. Like everything, yeah, it's just. And who knew that the Civil War was talked about so much in this movie? Like, what the heck? Like, there's just so much commentary on war and its brutality, and it's not what you at all.
And obviously, of course, the idea there is about, not just the Civil War. Obviously, it's about World War II, and it's about sort of the legacy of war on, in Italy, and it comes from Leone's own sort of background working in neorealism and whatever else. But there's so much we could get into with that movie that is really lovely and impressive.
The commentary on warfare is not at all related to like slavery and abolitionists and the North versus South. It's more of a conversation about like, well, this is a very maybe crude interpretation, but it does to me. I felt like it was like everybody's people, like everybody, like these people are just dying, and it's almost like there's no point. We're all human at the end of the day. Like, what are we doing? Turning on each other like this. So, strange commentary for a movie about cowboys shooting each other and looking for gold. It's very unique. So watch it. Cameron, I know we're at an hour 4 for recording. It'll probably be cut down a little bit because we hit record and then take a minute or two before we start. You spent some time preparing a list because obviously I've been talking a lot, being the lab rat and trying to interpret the films that we've watched. What I'm very curious about your top 5 from the 51 films, because you obviously have a heart for a lot of these movies that we've watched. Some of them have been memes, but you've genuinely put together a list that you care about. So
yeah, it's true. Well, I do want to just say, like, it's really impressive that we've been able to, or just looking back at it, you can put a catalog of 50 movies in your mind to say like, oh, like this draws from this, or this, is so like, yeah, it's really interesting and impressive that, we've gone through and really dissected and talked about 50 of these movies. So you are doing scholarship, you are learning a lot through watching these. And I think, for me, when I was first getting into it, or getting into movies just in general, one of my goals was to go through the IMDb top 250. Um, and I still haven't seen every movie on it. It also changes every now and then, but um, my I went through the first like 125, 130, um, and it gave me a lot of valuable insight on like what a great movie can be and what it can do. So what my only point in bringing that up is to say, like, the more you watch, the more you become sort of um thinking about these things. So
Yeah.
eventually the experiment is going to be over, because you'll be an expert just like me.
We'll have to bring on some new talent that
Yeah.
knows nothing about films. That'll be fun.
But I would say my list is fairly similar to yours. These are just like some of my favorites. Um, and there's so much that I wish I could include on it, but it's only 5 movies. At number 5, Children of Men. We already talked about it extensively, but
Yeah.
I agree. It's a masterpiece. It's a perfect movie. There's something there's something um, effervescent about it that is just so wonderful. And I could go back to it at any point. And it's a movie that I could recommend to almost anybody. So yeah, that's number 5 for me. Number 4, The Thing. I've gushed about this movie so much. It's one that it's like the same way that I consider like Doom 2016. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
fun, so wonderful, and it's one that I love revisiting. Every single time I'm like excited to watch The Thing. So yeah, it's just so good. Number 3, The Apartment. Again, we talked about it pretty extensively. So, I don't want to talk too much more about it, but you're right. It's a masterpiece. It's a great movie. One that has so much to say. Um, and so much that it's inspired by, you know, Billy Wilder's real life and real personality. And I think it comes across it comes across that this is something that he's really thought about and tackled. Number 2, a movie that we didn't mention yet, Bringing Up Baby, which I think is
No.
so wonderful and fun, and it's it's one of the oldest movies that I can just say hands down anybody could get into and anybody could watch and have fun with. And there's something really impressive about a movie from 1938 that someone from today can go back to and be like, "Oh man, that was really like fun and interesting and unique and like very subversive and not what I was expecting," So it's a movie that surprised me on first viewing, and I've fallen in love with it. It's up there for me as one of my favorites of all time. Uh, and number 1, another movie we haven't mentioned yet. It was our second episode, Sunset Boulevard. Uh,
Mm.
I think Sunset Boulevard is again a perfect movie. It's one that gives me chills when I think about. It's one that makes me want to go back and revisit it. And it's so impressive um, how much commentary is just like dripping from this movie. And obviously it's about Hollywood and it's about filmmaking in some regard, but it's not at all navel gazing. It's very much which is I think the main criticism that a lot of people have of like, maybe Birdman or something that's like very much talking about the creative process from a creative's perspective. Oftentimes it can look like, oh yeah, you're just talking about yourself. But this movie is not at all. It doesn't feel that way. It feels so critical. It's such a cynical movie. It's such an interesting movie, and it's so much fun. I love it. I think it's one of the greatest movies of all time. So yeah, that's my list.
Sunset Boulevard, number 1.
Yeah.
You didn't even have The Great Dictator on there, Cameron.
No, I didn't.
You're hurting me. You're hurting me. Well, somebody has to represent, so
Yeah,
it's good.
I mean, these are just my favorites of like the things that I will. It's basically the things that I want to go back and watch again.
Yeah,
is how I put my put it on my list. So yeah, all 5 of these movies are, and there's more than just these 5, but
yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that was a good breakdown. I don't know. There's so much more. Like, I feel like movies are a hobby that once you it's almost like you take one piece of wallpaper off and it just opens you into a whole new room, and then it's just like an endless expanse of things that you can dive into and get so deep into. That's why I find it so fun and interesting, is because there's so much more that you can always learn. So I'm excited to continue to dive deep into this world.
Just, I mean, we got to wrap this up, but one of the things that I found interesting is considering the IMDb top, 10, whatever's on there, and the Godfather is on the top 10 pretty heavily. I think the part 1 and part 2
are one,
and you and
2.
I, we didn't really talk about those
2
films.
and 3, but
on our list, and we watched both of them. Cameron, do you feel like those films are overrated? I mean, I don't mean to like call them out specifically, but when I saw them on our list, I was like, yeah, they're there. And I didn't really necessarily have as much of a response that, like, because they're on the top 10, I mean, for me, I was like surprised how little I seemed to care about including or talking about them in the top 5,
Yeah, no, I would kind of agree. I don't know. It's tough because I don't want to say that they're overrated, but for me, I've always said consistently, I like Goodfellas better than either of the Godfathers, because it's just a more enjoyable movie. I think to be fair though, The Godfather is a movie that I watched for the first time and I thought was good, didn't really have anything else to say about it. And then I watched it a couple more times and I sort of thought about it deeper, and it's a dense movie, and it's one that has a lot of it's like I said, it's like a novel, so I understand why people love it and why people appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's just, for me, Goodfellas is a more enjoyable movie personally.
I agree.
So it's not going to break my top 10 or top 5 or whatever, but I do appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah.
Sure.
I was curious about that, because when I think of what people talk about, like the best ones ever, like, yeah, I mean, again, this list that we created is limited to the films we watch on this podcast as well. So
yes.
Yeah. And there's other conversations that can happen. Well, Cameron, I think it's been a fun retrospective. I'm getting the burps and I'm starving. So I think it's time to wrap it up. We post every Monday. Thank you guys for listening. Any closing thoughts, Cameron?
No, I'm excited to, like I said, I'm excited to move deeper into the hobby for sure.
If you're Patreons, or if you're a patron, you can message us what you think of this kind of retrospective and what we're doing for the month of August. And if you're not a patron, you can message us on Instagram. All that good stuff at ECFS Productions. We're on Instagram and Facebook, but I never check Facebook, so don't message me there. Yeah, we have all the socials. So we're interested to know what you guys think. Hopefully you enjoyed the retrospective episode, and we'll see you next week. Cinema Spectator is an ECFS Productions podcast, executive produced by Darren O'Neill. If you want your name read in the credits of the show, you can check us out at patreon.com/ECFS Productions to achieve this status. Thank you, Darren, for the support, and for the rest of you, we appreciate your support as well. Have a good one.